Well, I want to talk to you today about what is a Jew. What is a Jew? Let's just really get down to it. What is a Jew? Well, you know, there are many different kinds of Jews. You see some blondes. Most of them, though, are the typical kind, the Hollywood, kind of person. Even the blonde Jews, of course, mostly have dyed hair. But I'm not talking about their physical characteristics. That doesn't bother me at all. I don't care if a person is, brown, black, white, small, large. I'm sort of large myself. But what is a Jew? Who are the Jews? Well, really, they're sort of a self-identified people, aren't they? Theodore Herzl, who's called a father of Zionism, wrote in his book, he wrote about going to dinner with a Jew, a very rich Jew, obviously. And he said we were so different, because Theodore Herzl was tall, very nice looking, and just European style guy, but taller than most Europeans. And this guy was sort of a hunchback, little dwarf of a guy. Like, some people picture all Jews are like. But Theodore Herzl said he wasn't like me, he was ugly. He wasn't like me, but we're both Jews. And he said, and then I figured out that we're really not a race. And I thought, what am I going to say in my book now? This guy's not like me, we're not all alike. He said, the best I can say is that we're a people with common characteristics. Well, that's what they are. They are a mosaic. But they say they're a race. They're a homogeneous race. They're a unified race. They're a unique race. They say in their Talmud, and they say on their television sets in Israel, they say they're different than you and me. They're ontologically, that means they were born physically to grow different, because they are a different species. They claim to be Jews, and we accept them as Jews. They claim to be Jews. So we just say, oh, you're a Jew. Now, how do we know they're a Jew? Well, there are historians. Ah, yes, the historians. Now, there's some Zionist historians, and they like to tell the story that we Jews came from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our history is 3,000 years long, and they want to take you back to the Ten Commandments movie, to Moses and all of that. And then there's people that are more truthful, like Arthur Kessler, who in 1973 wrote a book about the Khazarians. He was not really a historian. He wrote novels, actually. He was a very famous novelist from New York, Arthur Kessler, Jewish. But in his studies, he found that the Jews were not the Jews. They had no Jewish blood. They had no Israelite heritage. He said the Ashkenazi Jews, which is about 90 to 92% of all the Jews in the world, have no connection at all with Israel. Historically, they're Khazarians. What is Khazaria? Khazaria is, well, it used to be a country, a large country, in the Caucasus, in southern Russia. And in the 8th century, the king, who sort of patterned himself after like Solomon, had 60 wives, and all the sumptuousness and the grandeur, majesty of Solomon. The people of Khazaria, which was one of the largest countries in Europe and Asia at the time, they were not Russian. They were Turkish with some Mongol mixed in. But the king, his name was Bulan, and I'd love to talk to you about the name Bulan. But King Bulan said, we're all pagans. We worship the male appendage, to use a better term, a lack of a better term. Many of us worship the male appendage as a god. And there are other nativist gods that we have. We're pagans. But he said the people to the west of us are Christian. The people to the east of us are Muslims. We're in the middle. We need to choose what we want. But I don't want to be Muslim or Christian. He finally chose Judaism. And he brought in, because they didn't have any Jews in Israel. You remember that in 70 AD, as Jesus prophesied in the Bible, the Romans came in under Titus, who was a general who became the emperor, and he destroyed Israel. Hundreds of thousands were massacred. And as far as that, the Wailing Wall, they call it, that silly place, that's not a Wailing Wall. Jesus said every stone will be thrown down, one upon another. That was Jesus' prophecy. This is Fort Antonia, the Roman fort. It's been many things over the years, but it's certainly not the Wailing Wall. So they say they are. They say they're not Khazars. In fact, they hounded Arthur Kessler so much, the man killed himself. He and his wife killed themselves. They were hounded. He said he put out his book, a very great historical book, by the way, and I've got it, and I've read it several times. But Arthur Kessler said that he put out the book because he's a Zionist. He wanted to show people like the Hitler and the Nazis that they were fighting the wrong thing. They weren't even fighting a race. This is not, the ancient Israelites. This race of people is not a race, it's a people, but their history ends in Khazaria in the 8th century. Now, what happened to the people of Khazaria? Well, they needed a drink of water, I suppose. The people of Khazaria became Jews in the 8th century. The king commanded it. And most of the people became Jews. By the 10th century, though, Khazaria was in trouble. They're being invaded by Mongols, they're being invaded by Huns, and most of all the Russians. The Tsars came down. And they basically conquered, in the 10th century, conquered Khazaria. Many of the Khazarians who were, quote-unquote, Jewish converts, okay? Jewish converts. They had learned Judaism, the Babylonian Talmud, from Babylonian rabbis that were Jews, that had been invited over there by their king. So they fled the country. Where did they go to? They went mostly to Poland, but also to Hungary, to Romania, to Czechoslovakia, but mostly to Poland. Okay? They were Polish. Now, I'm going to get to this in just a minute, because I want you to understand then that Khazarians became basically Polish. But the Khazarians, being a very clannish people, being Jewish, believing that they were special because they had converted, eventually forgot who they were. They did. Most of them did. I don't think the leaders did. The leaders had the sacred books, though. They knew they were Khazarians. But here the Khazarians were then in Poland, in Hungary. And eventually they went over to Germany. Then they went over to Great Britain. And many then came to the United States. And we especially began to have these Khazarians who thought they were Jews come to the United States. Particularly at the beginning, thank you, Chris, of this century. Or rather the 20th century, that is. In 1948, the Khazars saw their opportunity. After all, Truman was president of the United States. He was a 33rd degree Mason. And Stalin was the head of the Russian government, the Communist Party chief. And Stalin was a Freemason as well. And of course, all of the Israeli big shots are all Freemasons. Netanyahu was initiated into the lodge when he went to school here in the United States, up in New England. In 1948, the Khazars arranged for them to take Palestine as their own. They went into that country of unwalled villages. They got approval from Truman, because I show in my book, Conspiracy of the Six-Pointed Star, that they gave Truman over $2 million bribe. Abraham Feinberg, now the FBI, has declassified documents that show that he gave Truman well over $2 million as a bribe to recognize Israel. And so Israel was recognized as a nation, and about 4 hours later, over in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin also recognized it as a nation. 3 years after World War II, if you have the United States and the Soviet Union recognize you, well, you're a nation, right? And so the Khazars, the Jews, planned to leave Poland, mostly, and go into Israel and to conquer Israel. Now, it's interesting that since that time, since 1948, the exodus out of Europe of these Khazar Jews into Israel, every prime minister of Israel has been a Polish person. A Pole has been the prime minister. Think about that. Now, they all changed their names. Shimon Peres, his last name is Kursky. Benjamin Netanyahu, his father, Ben Zion Netanyahu, was from Poland. Netanyahu is the only person, he was born in Israel. He's the first prime minister who was not a Polish person. And every one of them changed their name. Why did they have to change their name? Well, they all had Polish names. They didn't have Jewish names. They had Polish names. That's what they were. That's why Helen Thomas of the United Press, when asked, well, where should the Jews go then? She said they ought to go back to Europe where they came from. Of course. That's exactly right. They came over, you see, first they started in Khazaria. Then they converted to Judaism there. Then the Khazarians went over to Poland mostly. And then with the United States and Soviet Union's permission, they went into Israel. Now in Israel, they met with the Palestinians. Palestinians didn't have an army. They were living very peacefully. They were good people. They had been there for hundreds of years. And they were easily defeated by the forces of the Jews. Now, think about that. When the Jews went into Israel, I read the stories. You may want to read the book Ethnic Cleansing of Israel by a Jew. He says that the very first building, sort of like our White House, sort of like the Soviet Union's Kremlin, that the Jews took their offices in, their government offices in Tel Aviv, was called the Red House. Why was it called the Red House? Because they were all commies. They were all communist socialists. David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, was an avid admirer of Vladimir Lenin. They were all communists. But what did we think in America? Oh, they're wonderful people. Well, they're kibbutzniks. They love these collective forms. Yeah, they did. Of course. They were all communists. For 3 years, they had rampaged in Poland, murdering Gentiles. They actually put together the concentration camps after Hitler and the Nazis failed. They took over all the concentration camps. Read the book by Jonathan Sack we have in our ministry, called An Eye for an Eye. And where did I learn about the book? Well, American Free Press. Read that book. Jonathan Sack was amazed to discover that after World War II, the Jews took over all the concentration camps. And who did they put into those camps? But Germans. Wherever they went, they took Germans in these countries of Eastern Europe. And they put them there, men, women, children. Read about Shlomo Morel, who loved to take little German babies and slam them against walls and take bar stools and beat German men and women to death. He was commandant of one of those camps. But let's get back to the story of the Jews. They said, well, that can't be. We're not Khazarians, we're Jews. We're better than the Gentiles. We can't be Gentiles. But they were. But how could you prove that? Only through DNA could you prove such a thing. In 1968, Watson and Crick in Great Britain came up with what is called DNA. DNA. Now DNA, you know what it is. Hey, you've seen all these crime shows. You want to convict somebody? Get the DNA evidence. You want to exonerate a murderer? Get DNA evidence on someone else. That's how you do it. DNA evidence is powerful. If you get DNA evidence, that guy's gone. Okay, that's what it takes. And it's amazing to me that it's from 1968 when we came up with DNA. It was 2001 before the first look at the Jewish people was made. Now, I'm sure behind the scenes there was a lot of jockeying, there was a lot of anger going on. Because the Jewish people, look what they've done since 1948. Okay? From 1948 to 2001, when they took the first true study of DNA of the Jews, look what they had done. They had conquered the United States. They were telling us what to do. Their lobby runs our Congress. And they've got all the land. And they've got the atomic bomb. And they've got nuclear missiles that go on submarines. And they've got ICBMs, well, probably IRBMs. They've even threatened Europe. One of the Israeli professors said if Europe doesn't do what we tell it to do, we could just send a few nuclear missiles its way. Oh, they're big on that. And of course, you want to read Mike's book about the golem. It's the golem. It's the monster. It comes, into fullness. It's like magic. And it's the guard. It's the praetorian for the Jewish people. The golem. The nuclear bomb is very important. And there's a reason why the Jews in the United States demanded that Franklin Roosevelt developed the nuclear bomb. And notice, it was called the Manhattan Project, because a band of Jews from Manhattan put it all together. And it was Oppenheimer, a Jew, who ran the project. And his clearance was taken away after World War II, because the guy was giving the secrets to the Russians. Why? Because the Russians are the ones that did all the murders of the 66 million people. That's how many died. 66 million, Solzhenitsyn says, died in the Soviet Union from 1917 to 1985. Think about that. 66 million massacre. Who did it? Well, the official records show that 19 of the 22 in the first Politburo were Jews. But they've had to change that. Now it's 20 of 22. Now the Russians have admitted that Lenin also was Jewish. His father was named Blok. He gave himself a new name. Why did he do it? The Lenin Museum in Red Square in Moscow, the curator says, it's because we didn't want, the communists did not want the Jewish people to know that they were run, the country was run, the system was run by Jews. They would have been against that. Well, I suppose when you have 66 million of your countrymen dying, you would be a little angry at who's killing them, wouldn't you? You'd like to know if it's Jews. When 20 or 22, but it's probably 21, because now we're finding out that, no doubt, Stalin also was Jewish. Now, I know he turned against his Jewish countrymen in the late days, but that was all one Jewish thief fighting another Jewish thief. Think about it. Lenin was married to Krupskaya. She was Jewish. His wife was Jewish. And Joseph Stalin was married to Jewish women, one of whom he murdered. And then he married his deputy, the deputy, chairman, Kaganovich. He was Jewish. The second man to Stalin was Jewish. And Stalin married his sister. So you see how it's all wrapped around there. It was a Jewish thing. Now let's go back to the Khazars. In 2001, Dr. Ariella Oppenheim of Hebrew University, a biologist, a geneticist, did her famous study. Guess what? She found out that the Jews are not Jews. All of the Jews that live in Israel, actually, she said, they appear to come from Khazarian. Now she's Jewish. She's a Jewish doctor. She's from Hebrew University. She says their bloodline is Turkey, with some Mongol. And amazingly, she says the Palestinians have as much or more Jewish blood coursing through their veins than do they who call themselves Jews. Whoa! The Palestinians have as much or more Jewish blood coursing through their veins. Now think about that. What if the Khazars are Gentiles and the Palestinians are the Jews? And all of these Christian churches are all assisting in the destruction, in the torture, in the demolition of the Jewish people. And they love it so. Wow. That's an amazing thing, isn't it? If this is true. But Dr. Ariel and Oppenheim, it can't be true. That was 2001. Has that been verified? Yes, in 2012, December. That's just a few months back, folks. That's why I wrote my book, DNA Science and the Jewish Bloodline. God just caused me to get in there and write this book. And I did in about 2 weeks. I put everything into it that I could. It tells the story of another Jewish geneticist and scientist. Very, very distinguished man from Johns Hopkins Medical University, the Nathan McCusick Genetic Institute. He did a study, and it just came out in 2012. His name is Dr. Iran El-Haq. What did he find? Well, the Khazars are the Jews. Now, is he a horribly pitiful anti-Semite? Don't call him that. He'll get angry. This man was born in Israel. He is a Jew, but he says, I'm a Khazar Jew. After all, we're all Khazars. He spent 7 years in the Israeli Armed Forces. Now, he's a researcher and a doctor at Johns Hopkins Medical University. And he says, yeah, Dr. Oppenheim is right. We are Khazars. We're not Israelites. We have no connection. We came from Khazaria. Dr. Kessler was correct. Now, was his research peer-reviewed? Yes, it was. Was it in an acknowledged journal? Yes, it was. The Journal of Biology and Evolution. And who is the editor of the Journal of Biology and Evolution? That would be Dr. Dan Grauer of the University of Houston. One of the world's most famous genetic scientists. Dr. Grauer was delighted to put this peer-reviewed article in his journal, which is published by the Oxford Press. Very prestigious. And of course it was in Science News and all kinds of different journals and magazines. Dr. Grauer laughed when he was told that the scientists opposed this research. He laughed. He said, well, I suppose that they would do that. He said, but Dr. El-Haq is a very distinguished, honest man. Dr. El-Haq says he was surprised that the Zionists rushed out and said, oh no, this can't be. We're really Jews. We're not Khazars. Who are you to say we're Khazars? Well, he said, what am I? I'm a researcher. He says he has no interest in politics at all. He didn't do his research to further the Zionist view or the anti-Zionist view. He's a man who finds out about disease. And you need to get to the bottom of what a person is DNA-wise to know what diseases that they're vulnerable to. Through DNA now they're finding all kinds of new information on what to do about this disease, that disease. He says that's what I'm interested in. Think about that. These are earth-shaking. These are shattering news items. Well, what about it? I mean, this should have upset the world. But the Jews don't like it. The Zionists don't like it. Now I immediately put out my book. In December, this research came out. I had my book out, out of February. Well, a woman recently, a young woman, she's a beautiful young lady. She wants to marry a Jewish man. Why do you want to marry a Jewish man? I think God will bless me. I went to a prophecy conference. A lady came up, she was wearing a Jewish Star of David. I wear this. I've been sending money to the Temple Mount Foundation. And that temple, if they rebuild that temple, that's going to be for the Antichrist. Why would you want to rebuild that thing for it? Well, it's to help fulfill Bible prophecy. Well, you get yourself your own gun, go out and kill 100 people. I mean, you know, whatever you want to do, you can fulfill Bible prophecy. But why don't you do what God wants you to do? He doesn't want you to give money to a future Jewish temple. That's crazy. And by the way, I hope they don't build it on top of the Wailing Wall, which is Fort Antonio, because Jesus said every stone will be right. And Jesus told the truth. Now what about the Jews? I also show in my book, DNA Science of the Jewish Bloodline, that the Jews are the synagogue of Satan. No, well, the Khazars are. I don't even know that they're really a significant amount of Jews in the whole world today. They're all Khazars. At least 92% of them. And the good thing is Dr. Elhike said he's going to study the Sephardic Jews, the other 8% next. He wants to find out where they come from. Boy, they're going to be shocked. What are Christians going to do? In Revelation 2 and 3, God wants us to know this. This is in Revelation. The last days, what does he say? He warns the church of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. They say they're Jews and they're not, but they are the synagogue of Satan. And he says they're blasphemers. And they persecute and they kill Christians. Now, and they're the synagogue of Satan. But how about those who say, well, the Jews, they seem to be of one mind. They seem to be all unified. They seem to be of one race. And the Christians say, oh, they're one race. They've been one race since Abraham. And they're all, you know, unified. No, they're not. They've been together. They have their rabbis. I understand what happens culturally and socially when people are stuck together. Read Israel Shahak's book about 3,000 years of history. Israel Shahak, of course, the Israeli man, a Jew. But he says of the Jews, they sank into abject superstition, into dark mystery, in the medieval period. And they stayed cloistered in their own community. At that time, they wouldn't even get an education. They were there and they would do whatever their rabbis told them. And the rabbis taught them magic and sorcery. That's what their religion is. Let me tell you something, friends. Get my book, Conspiracy of the Six-Pointed Star. It tells you about the religion of the Jews. It is not the Old Testament.